Music theory with OneNote. Scale degree key conversion to an absolute mode numbering system. Get ready and some coffee, because although we're playing with just one note, it's a beautiful note. You're not required to, but if you have access to it and would like to follow along, we're currently in the OneNote file of the Modal Node System, MNS Presentation 1165 Excel, Scale Degree Key Conversion to Absolute Mode Numbering. One of only a few presentations thus far, but we plan on adding plenty more to it shortly. Also noting that in this presentation, we can spend all of our time on the theory, but we do have another presentation by the same name and number where we spend time actually building the tables in Excel, practicing our Excel tools as well as the music theory tools. We now want to think about the possible problem of communication of musical information with others, possibly our bandmates, for example. One of the issues that always comes up is going to be, what is the scale that we are playing in, and what are the notes in that scale, and how are they mapped out on the fretboard? So for example, if someone says, hey, we're playing in A minor, it's pretty easy to know what the tonic is, but sometimes it's a little difficult to know the 7 notes, the collection of notes, and how they're mapped out on the fretboard. To analyze this, let's take a step back and think of our analogy that I keep on wanting to hammer home, that being that the fretboard is a map of our territory. I'm going to compare it to the globe here. There's going to be 7 destination points, 7 in essence continents that we want to get to. There's 12 actual locations, but the non-destination points are like the oceans. We're going through them. We might touch in on them, but we're going through them to get to the continents, which there are only 7 of. And then if we imagine our vantage point from space, we can see our global fretboard would shift around. It shifts around. So all the continents are shifting around. I'm going to name those continents by the name of them. It's going to be Europe. It's going to be the Americas and whatnot and so on. Those are going to be the modal names as they're shifting around. However, I need to know what vantage point I'm looking at it from space so I know which continent to look at, where it is from my perspective. That is going to be the 1 through 12 on the alphabet. So if I say that we're playing in the collection of notes to my vantage point in the key of C, then I'm going to say it's going to be key of C, and the 7 continents are going to be in that location relative to the key of C, right? That's going to be the idea. So once I'm in there, once I'm in that collection of notes, I'm not going to look at it by the note name anymore, because the note name is there just to tell me what my viewpoint is. Now I'm going to look at it by the continent names. In our case, that's going to be analogous to the modes, right? So the Ionian mode, or absolute Nashville number music system number 1, the Phrygian number 3, the Mixolydian number 5. So once I'm into the system, I want to look at the actual continents in a way that aren't going to be moving. So that's going to be the general idea. So notice if someone says, hey, we're going to be playing in A minor, what's the problem here? It's that I don't name, from my vantage point in space, I don't name the collection of notes by the minor degree, by the 6th. The collection of notes would be best and easiest to tell people, as it is done in like a Nashville music system. Hey, the related major that's going to tell you the collection of notes is the key of C, but we are going to be focusing in not around that continent on the key of C, which would be the Ionian, but rather we're going to be spending most of our time on the continent of the 6, which is the Aeolian. So that would be a lot more specific, right? It'd be a lot easier on people to say, hey, look, we're doing the collection of notes related to the key of C, C major if you want to call it that, and then we're going to be focusing around the modal center of the 6th of that collection of notes, which is the Aeolian, right? That's how we would basically say it. But no one says it that way, right? People typically say we're in the key of A minor, and they basically change the continent names. So if this was Europe and this is America, right, now they say, well, now this is Europe and that's America, because they changed the note names. They make this number 1, right? That's going to cause us a problem when we start to list out the chords, the 1, 4, 5, because then we're going to have to rename the shape and think about how to convert back and forth from the shape. We'll talk about that later. Right now, I just want to say, okay, if someone says I'm in A minor or they say I'm in Dorian or something, how could I then figure out what the related major is? Because the related major is the thing that's going to allow me to know where the whole shape lies. Once I know where the related major is, I could just shift this shape up to that proper location, stop looking at it from the note names, but rather look at it from the permanent structure, which is actually the names of the Nashville music system, if you want to see it that way, or the modes. Those are the things that stay constant. All right, so let's go back up and think of some exercises that we can do that. By the way, there's 3 ways that you can do that. Let's do one more thing. There's 3 ways that you can kind of do that. If someone says that, hey, I'm in A minor, I'm going to say, okay, I need to find the related major to know where the collection of notes are, to know where the shape is. So I could look at my fretboard and just know that, well, if that's the 6, then I could go 7, 8, meaning there's 2 modal half steps up to get to home, meaning Nashville numbers system, for example, has 1 through 7. So if I'm on the 6, there's only going to be 1 more before it starts over. So I happen to know shape-wise that the C is going to, that the major is going to be up here. It's going to be 3 notes up, or 2 modal half steps up from the A. So if I know the shape on my guitar, I can do that because I can count through it. I can say, well, I know the A is the 6, and I know that that's the 6 means that there's going to be 7, 8, or 1, 2 modal half steps up. But that's not enough to get there, because the fact that I go 2 modal half steps up doesn't tell me the number of actual notes up, because there's 7 notes out of the 12 notes in the musical alphabet. But if I know where that is on the guitar and I know my shape, I can see where that is, and that'll help me to kind of figure it out. So the other way that we can do it is to use the formula whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, and say I'm on the 6. So then I'm going to figure out the 6 is going to be a whole and then a half from that point within the formula to get me back to the 8 or the 1 to show me that the C is the collection of notes that we are on. You can also do it by interval. This is the last way to do it, where we could name the interval. I would like to name the interval by saying I want to know the distance between each of the modes. So I would call this an AI mode range, or a 6-1 mode range. What's the distance between the Aeolian and the Ionian, in other words? Well, it's 1, 2, 3. It's 3 notes away. It's a second modal half step. It's a 3 note away second modal half step, which from a scale degree, which would be the 3rd, right? But that's my terminology. You can also, most people will see it the other way. They're going to say, hey, whatever the major is, which in this case is the C. I don't know it's a C. I just know there's an A minor. But whatever the major is, to get from the 1 to the 6, right? What's the distance to get from the 1 to the 6? It's going to be a 9 note away major 6, right? So we can then use that interval to figure it out. Okay, so those are the kind of like the 3 methods that we have. But let's break it down in more detail and look at some examples. So we're going to use our normal sum math here. So we're going to say, I would like to number all of my notes, and then all of the notes are going to have, these are going to be how I represent them. A, this stands for A sharp or B flat. I don't care which you call it. I'm going to call it number 2 for the ease purposes. And if I have to deal with that note, I want to call it a number 2 because that's going to allow me to do some simple math, particularly if I'm trying to look at distances to figure out what key I am and what the related major is. And then I can combine them together. So these are the note names and the note numbers. All right, so then in the modes. So I'm going to keep on hounding on the modes because I think the modes are going to be particularly important for us to basically understand the Nashville music system is in essence in the modes, and they're always in order. They're like in a circle. So we have Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and then we're going to repeat it over again. So then we have the mode numbers. Now, these are what I'm going to call absolute mode numbers, like the Nashville number system. I don't care if I'm in the major key or the minor key. I want to keep the numbers the same. I think that's actually the more sophisticated thing to do. That, you know, and again, this is the paradigm shift that I'm really kind of advocating here. And that is, most people think that it's the shortcut thing to do. It's the Nashville number system. It's the hack. It's the hack thing to do to try to keep the number system the same. And the sophisticated people, those people are going to shift the numbers. But no, it's actually the other way around, right? There's no, the shifting the numbers all around doesn't make any sense, right? It's not sophisticated to do something that doesn't make sense. Now, I mean, you could make some arguments on the piano why it would make more sense, because they start to, when you look at sheet music, they name the sheet music on basically how many half steps are in a scale. So you start to memorize all these half steps, because that helps you to memorize the black keys on the piano, because you have to memorize 12 different shapes on a piano. So it kind of makes sense, although it's still kind of a hack. It makes no sense on a guitar because there are no black keys. I don't need to know what the how many sharps and flats. I just need to see what the shape is, right? So I want to see it in a number that's uniform. That's the way that's the sophisticated way to do it. That's the proper way. All right. So it's 1, 2. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's only 7 modes. All right. So then we can give them Roman numerals, meaning what type of mode are each of these, and that'll also tell us what kind of 3-note triad would be built from it. So the Ionian number 1 is capital because it's a major key, which has a major third. Dorian is a minor 2. Phrygian is a minor 3. The Lydian is a major 4. Mixolydian is a major 5. Aeolian is a minor 6. And the Locrian is the diminished 7, has a flat third as well as a flat 5. So then we have the formula, which you could state as whole, and this is what one of the ways we work with it. So remember, the formula is kind of in between these here. So if we're going from the 1 to the 2, it's a whole step. If we're going from the 2 to the 3, it's going to be a half step. If we're going from the 3 to the 4, it's going to be a whole step. 4 to 5, it's going to be a whole step. 5 to 6 is a whole step. And then 6 to 7, 6 to 7 is a whole step, and 7 back to 1 is a half step. Sorry about that. And then we're going to repeat the process once again. Now, note that if someone says they're on the Aeolian, then what do we have to do? We don't need to remember a different formula. You can remember it as though it's a different formula, but you might as well just say in your mind, hey, look, it's whole, half, whole, and that gets us to the Aeolian. So if I'm on the Aeolian and I want to get to the Ionian, or if I'm on the 6 Nashville number music and I want to get to the 1, I've got to do a whole, half, whole. Now notice if you're going back the other way, like if I was on Aeolian down here, because these are in the middle, so I'm on Aeolian and now the whole is right here to get back to the whole would be up here. It's staggered 1, right? So we're on the Aeolian whole to get to the Mixolydian whole to get to the Lydian, and so on and so forth. So when we're one of the things that's going to be an issue is to say, hey, look, if I'm on like the Aeolian, does it make more sense to try to get to the Ionian by going backwards or forwards? And typically on the Aeolian, because it's greater than 4, right, it makes more sense to go forward. So if someone says they're playing in Aeolian, otherwise known as the minor, how am I going to get to the related major? I'm not going to count back from the 6 to the 1. It's going to be easier to go from the 6, 7, 1 this way, to go up around the circle to figure out where the major is. And that's the most common one, by the way. But if we were playing in the Dorian, then do I want to count forward or backwards? It would be easier, although more difficult for most people, to count backwards. The Dorian is the second of my collection of notes. So if someone says they're on the Dorian, then what we're going to do is go back to the Ionian, which would be a whole step back, right? This whole step back to get to the Ionian. All right. Now, if I look at these formulas, remember that whole step stands for 2. Our unit of major is a half step. So it's 2 half steps, whole step. I'm sorry. It's two half step, 1 half step, 2, 2, 2, 1. So it's possibly better to actually memorize it this way 2-2-1, 2-2-2-1. And if you know your notes as numbers as well, then this will make it a lot easier. And remember, I just want to keep pointing out that a lot of people on a piano don't really see it this way, in part because they're visualizing where the black notes are on the piano. So what they want to do is they want to say, hey, look, there's so many sharps and flats in each of the keys, which helps me to identify where my hands go physically on the piano. But again, that doesn't make any sense on the guitar at all. And even on the piano, I think it's a shortcut that's may not even be the best thing to do, although you have to memorize your shapes, and that might be helpful. For us, it would be a lot easier to say, hey, look, I would like to know what the number is, and then learn the numbers 2-2-1, 2-2-2-1 on the guitar, so I can do some simple math to try to figure things out. How are we going to figure things out? I figure things out by a complete uniform shape on the guitar. Notice there's pros and cons on the guitar, right? Because I have 6 strings. That makes it difficult. The shape looks crazy instead of 1 string, but it's completely symmetrical, which is a huge benefit. The piano is not, right? So that's why on the piano, you're trying to memorize where the black notes are going to be in the pattern. It's different for all 12 patterns of all your collections of notes, where on the guitar, it's completely the same. All right? So I don't want to do... So the sharps and flats, like memorizing my sharps and flats, unless I'm reading sheet music, is not helpful. That's not helpful for me, right? Because it doesn't help me finger the guitar at all. All right, so just if you're a guitar player, that's useful information to know, okay? I'm just saying. All right, so let's practice one. We'll just go through all of them. Let's say we're on the Dorian. So we're on the Dorian, let's say, and I'm going to go down here and say that we have then let's do it this way. I'm going to say that we're on D Dorian. So we're going to imagine someone says, hey, now I'm going to make all of these tie out to kind of like the major key, because I think that's just good practice for us, because we have an internal control of not having any of the sharps and flats, but then you can apply the same concept to any other key, right? So we're going to say it's going to be the D Dorian. How could I figure out then what the related major is? Because I'm going to say, okay, that's cool, because I know where the tonic is if I'm in D Dorian. So I'm going to go down here and say, So I'm going to say, look, here's my guitar. Usually I find it on the top string. I'm like, oh, there's the D. So I know my tonic is there. I know where my Ds are. That's cool, possibly, or at least I can find one D. I want to memorize at least the top 2 strings, be able to find it there and there. But I don't know what the shape is because it's Dorian, and I typically know my collection of notes as it relates to the major key. So how can I get to the related major key? Well, I know that the Dorian is the second, right? It's the second mode. So the easiest thing to do would say, I'm going to go back 1 mode. There's 7 modes. I'm on the Nashville number system number 2. I need to go back what I would call 1 modal half step. So notice going back 1 nodal half step isn't necessarily 1 note half step, but if I know my shape, then I can say, then it's going to be 1 whole step back, right? Because the formula goes whole step, right? From the major to the Dorian, from the 1 to the 2. That means if I go backwards, I'm going to go back that whole step. And also realize that the distance between any of these nodes is always the same. So I know that I'm going from a D to a C, which I would call a modal range of a 2-1 modal range, right? So which if you were going to go forward, but if we're going backwards, it's going to be 2 half steps back, or 1 modal half step back, which means that if I was to go forward, how many modal whole steps forward? Well, 7 minus 1 would be 6 modal whole steps forward, which you can't quite see, right? If I was down here on like this D, let's say this D, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 forward, right? So that's how I can basically find it, and then I can see what my shape is. Now remember, what the most clear thing to say is, if you're being nice to someone and you want to play in D Dorian, you're going to say, hey, look, we're going to be playing in the collection of notes related to the C major, and we're going to have the tonic, the modal center, be the 2 of it, which is the Dorian. So we're going to say collection of notes named by the note in the major key, and then we're going to be playing around the Dorian, the 2, right? That would be the nice way to say it, right? But no one does that, mostly because they're trying to be jerks, right? They're being jerks on purpose. See if you can figure it out. But so anyway, we're going to say, okay, so the other way so it's a 6. The other way we can do it is we can use the formula. So I'm going to say it's mode number 2. So I could use my formula going backwards. That would be the easy thing to do, because if I was on Ionian, the formula is whole step gets me to the Dorian. So 1 whole step gets me to the Dorian. So going backwards then would be 1 whole step backwards. If I know my numbering, 6 minus 2 would get me to 4. That's note number 4, which is a C. That's a lot easier than saying I'm on a D, and then if I go backwards, it would be a D flat and then a C. That's going to get quite tedious. It's a lot easier to say, oh, I know a D is note number 6, and a whole step represents 2 notes back. 6 minus 2 is 4. 4 is note number C, right? But what if I wanted to go forward? If I wanted to go forward, it's going to be way up here, right? Because it's 1 step back. So how many steps forward would it be then? We'd have to say, well, if I was on the Dorian, I got to get down to this Ionian. So what would be the formula? Well, I skipped that whole step, and then it would be 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1 would get me back to the Ionian. So I could count that up, right? It would be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it would be 10 half steps up, which again, if I look at if I knew the math, and it was on 6, I'd say, okay, well, it's 6 plus 10 is 16. There's only 12 notes in the musical alphabet. 16 minus 12 is basically 6 minus 2, which would be 4, right? And 4 is a C. Or I could count it out. I can say, well, 6 minus 1 half step gets me, 6 minus 2 gets me to 8. 8 minus 1 half step gets me up 1. 6 plus 2 gets me to 8. 8 plus 1 gets me to 9. 9 plus 2 to 11. 11 plus 2 gets me to 12, 13. But it goes around the horn. There's only 12 notes. So back to 1. And then 1 plus 1 half step gets me to 3. And then finally, 3 plus the 2 gets me to 4. So obviously, in this case, it would make a lot more sense to go back 1 than go up that distance. Now, most people are going to know possibly their intervals from the major's position. So if someone says they're in the Dorian, you're going to say, okay, well, if I think about the range of the Ionian or major to the Dorian, major to Dorian, which I would think of as a modal range of an ID or an Ionian Dorian modal range, you're probably going to be tempted to say, well, if I make the Ionian the 1, what would be the 2 or the Dorian related to the 1, right? So and so I would say, okay, I think I got a little messed up there, right? So from the perspective of the major, what's the Dorian? Well, it's the second one up. It would be a 2, and that would mean that it would be a 2 note away major second. So that means that I would go, if I was on the Dorian, I have to go 2 backwards, right? I'd have to go 2 backwards. So that would be the general idea. And so you can look at it from a scale degree, but the scale degree people usually know best from the major. So you're most likely going to switch your perspective from a scale degree standpoint to the major, right? And then try to figure out what the scale degree is, and then you have to go back, to the major, and that would be the general idea. I'll try to explain that better next time. But if we kept going back, these would be all the half steps for the formula going back. So let's try it again. Let's see if I can explain it better this time and say someone says they're on the Phrygian. Now, people don't play in the Phrygian all the time, but sometimes you do. You get that Spanishy sound sometimes with the Phrygian, right? Mostly you're going to be dealing with Aeolian and other than the major. But let's say we're on the Phrygian. So they're like, okay, we're playing in the Phrygian, and let's just say E Phrygian to make it easy. We know where it's going to end up. C is going to be the major, right? But we're going to say it's E Phrygian, right? And we're like, oh, dude, if I go to my fretboard over here, I know where the E is. I know where the E is. That's like the open E. That makes sense and whatnot. But I don't know my collection of notes unless you give me the relative major, because that's how I know my perspective, looking from space to see where my perspective should be. So how am I going to figure it out? Well, I know that the Phrygian is the third absolute mode. It's the third absolute mode. So what would make sense? Should I go forward until I get back to 1, or should I go backwards? Well, it's 3. It's going to make more sense basically going backwards. So if I'm on the third, I got to go back 2 modal half steps. So it would be easier if I say the E is up here, and then I go back 2 modal half steps, which is going to be 1, 2 modal half steps. So if I know my shape, I can kind of see that. I can see that on my shape and say, well, 2 modal half steps back from the Phrygian will look like that, right? Because I might know what the Phrygian shape should be from that perspective, so that I can count it out. Notice the 2 modal half steps back is 1, 2, 3, 4 steps back, right? So that's one way we could do it. We can also say then that I'm going to use my formula or my intervals. So let's go back on up and say, all right, well, what if I say there it's the 3, I'm going to go up. What's my formula? Well, if I'm on the Phrygian here, then it would make sense to go up. So the formula is whole to get me to the Phrygian. So I can see that's going to be a 4-note distance if I was on the C to get to Phrygian. So I'd have to go back 4 steps back from the Phrygian to get to the major. So in other words, if I was here, I'd say if I was on note number 8, which I'm calling E, 1 whole step back gets me to 6, which would be D, and another whole step back would get me to 4, which would be C. If I count those 2 up, that's a distance of 4, which in essence is the interval, which we'll talk about intervals later. I would like to name it, though, as a modal range, meaning this is the Ionian or the 1-3 or Ionian to the Phrygian modal range. So within that modal range, you have a 4-note away. It would be a 4-note away, which would be a 4-note away second modal half step, which would be a scale degree term of a major third. A major third. I kind of fumbled that up, but sorry about that. I'm trying to get the language all straight here. And so that would be the distance. So you can see it by basically interval. So most people would look at it from a scale degree and say that if I'm going from the 1 to the 3, from the perspective of a major, it'd be a 4-note away major third. So then I'd have to back out 4 to get there. Or we can count up. So if I counted up from the Phrygian, we'd say, okay, so if I started here, it'd be 1, 2, 2, 2, 1 to get me back to the Ionian. So if I went up to get around the circle, then we can go, okay, it went 8. I have 8 here, and we're going up 8 up 1 to 9, and then going up from 9 2 to 11, and 11 plus 2 gets me 12, and then back to 1, and then 1 plus 2 gets me to 3, and 3 plus 1 finally gets me to the 4. So what's the distance there? We have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which makes sense because to go the other way, it was 4. So if I go this way, it's got to be 12 minus 4, which is going to be 8. So what's the modal range for the 3, 1, or the 3, 1 modal range? It's going to be, an 8-note away, half step away distance. And then if you look at it from a scale degree standpoint, it's going to be an 8-note away, which would be a minor 6, which we'll talk more about scale degrees later. Let's try another one. Let's say that now we're on the Mixolydian or the Lydian. We'll say we're on the Lydian, and so they say, okay, we're on F Lydian. All right, so okay, F Lydian. We're like, oh, dude, F Lydian. All right. So if I go over here, I'm like, here's an F right there. I can find an F, but I don't know what the collection of notes are because I need to know the relative major scale to do that. But I know that the Lydian is the fourth, right? It's the fourth mode. So then I can say, well, that means would it be easier to move forward or backwards? So it's getting pretty close to either way. I could say it's going 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 1. So if I went forward, it would be 4, and then modal half step, 5, 6, 7, and then 1. So I can go forward that way. Or it might be easier to go backwards sometimes. So if I'm like, all right, here's the F right here. So it's the fourth going up. So I'm going to go back for 1 modal half step back, 4, 3, 2, 1. So if I know my shape on the guitar from a Lydian point, wherever that Lydian point is, if I know my shape, because I know the Lydian as the bottom of this box, and I know the shape is always the same, even if it was shifted up or back because I was playing in a different key, then as long as I can find the Lydian, I will know the shape, right? I'll always be able to find the shape because that's the beautiful thing about the guitar. It's completely symmetrical. But if I don't know the shape, then I can say, okay, I can use my formula, right? I can say, and by the way, if you're on the piano, what are they going to say? They're going to say, hey, look, what I need to do is there's always going to be A through G. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to count backwards and be able to find the relative A through G. But the problem with that is that doesn't work unless you have memorized which keys have the whole steps and have all the sharps and flats in it, which is something that's not worth doing really on the guitar. It's only worth doing if you're reading classical old sheet music or you play the piano, because that tells you what position your fingers go in for the black notes on the piano. It has almost no relevance on the guitar. And sheet music, by the way, which we'll talk about later, is written not very nicely to the guitar because we don't need the sharps and flats, right? So there's a better way to do the sheet music. So we'll get into that later, but just in case you're, I just want to do my little rant on that one. So anyway, so if we're on the Lydian, so we're on the Lydian here, we can go back up, so to get to the Ionian. So if we do that, so we could go backwards. So let's go back on over. All right, so here is this one. So we're going to say, all right, so now we're going from note number 9, which is an F, and we're going to go back 1. So notice we're going up, shifting up this way to go back because of the staggering of the whole steps and half steps. And then we're going to go back 2 to get to 6. So 8 minus 2 gets to 6, and then 6 minus 2 gets us to 4. So what's the distance? It's going to be 2, 4, 5. So most people would look at this from a scale degree standpoint and say, okay, let me look at it from the perspective of the major. So if I was on the Ionian and I was going to the Lydian is the 4, so it would be a 5 note away perfect fourth. We'll talk about that later. I think it would be better to be able to memorize the modal ranges both ways, which I would call a 1-4 modal range or Ionian to Lydian modal range, right? And to be able to recognize the range going the other way, a 4-1 modal range, right? Because that way, again, the distances between all the modes are the same. You don't need to make it the 1. What you want to know are all the distances between all the modes. They're always the same, right? That's the thing that would be best. But again, the naming convention is going to get you back. So if I went from the 1-4 modal range, I'm going to say it's a 5 note away. It's going to be a 5 note away third modal half step, which would get us to the 4th scale degree, right? Okay, but a 5 note away perfect fourth. Anyway, so then if I could go the other way and say, what if I went the other way on my formula? So now I'm on note 9 plus 2 gets us to 11. 11 plus 2 gets us to 1 because it's 12 and then 1. 1 plus 2 is going to get us to 3, and then 3 plus 2 is going to get us to 4. So if I went from the 4-1 modal range, what's the distance? 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1. So it's going to be 2, 4, 6, 7. It's a 7 note away. We would call that normally from a scale degree a perfect fifth, I would call it a modal range of a 4-1 modal range. A 4-1 modal range has a 7-note away fourth modal half step, which would be the scale degree of a 7-note away perfect fifth, right? I'm trying to get my terminology correct because, again, I'm trying to not get sucked into the scale degree, which is difficult even for me, even still, as I practice this, because that's the normal convention that people have. But what you want to be able to do is be able to say, I can say that this is a 7-note away perfect fifth without forcing myself to say this is the one, right? Most people can't do that though. Like if I wanted to look at it from the perspective of the C, I can't. I have to force myself to say that the C is the tonic or the one in order to think about the distance. But it's possible not to do that. It's possible to say, hey, look, I'm just looking at the 2, 4, 5, the 5-note away perfect fourth as just a distance. I'm ignoring the fact that it says fourth, which makes me think of the one. I'm just looking at it from a distance terminology, not as a scale degree. That's not how most people do it, though. It's hard to do that because we're trained to keep on changing the number system. So I think it's easy to practice, or good practice, to try to think of scale degrees and what I would call modal half steps, which will always be one less than the scale degree, so that you don't end up renaming. All right, let's try another one. Mixolydian. So we're going to be on Mixolydian. So they're like, okay, we're on G Mixolydian. So we're like, oh, gee whiz, G Mixolydian. Could you be more specific? So there's the G, but I don't know what the other notes are because I need to know what the related major is in order to figure it out. So I know it's the 5. It's the 5 mode, right? So how can I figure out, well, now I'm getting closer to going forward would be easier than going backwards, right? Because I'm on 5, there's only 7. So I can say, well, I'm on 5, 6, 7, and then 1. So I need to go 3 modal half steps up to get back to Ionian. So if I know my shape from the 5, guitar-wise, I could say, well, there's 1 modal half step, 2 modal half step, 3 modal half steps, right? Now, how many distance in actual half steps or note half steps? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I would need to know the shape in order to see that it's only 1, 2, 3 modal half steps up. Otherwise, I'd have to use some other method to kind of figure out how many steps up in order to know what the major is going to be. Again, what would it be the nice way to say it this? You'd say, hey, look, we're on the set of notes that are based off of the C major, but the tonic is going to be the 5th, in other words, the Mixolydian mode of the notes, 7 notes destinations of C major. Most people don't do that because, again, they're trying to show off. They're trying to make you look bad by telling you as little information as possible. See if you can figure it out. So now we're going to say, okay, we're on Mixolydian. So now it would be easier to go forward than backwards, most likely, right? So now I'm on the 5. What's the formula? Well, it's whole. It's whole, half, whole. To get to Mixolydian, I want to get back to the Ionian, so I'm going to keep going forward from Mixolydian. It's a whole step to get to the Aeolian. From Aeolian, it's a whole step to get to the Locrian. From Locrian, it's a whole step to get to the Ionian. What's the distance then? It's going to be from the Mixolydian 2, 4, 5. So it's a 5-note distance, right? So let's go back on over here and say, all right, this time I'm going to go down first, right? So now it's 11 plus 2 goes to 12, and then back to 1 for the A, because there's only 12 notes, and then 1 plus 2 gets me to 3. 3 plus 1 is going to give me to the 4. So we have a 2, 3, 4 distance. So notice from G to the major is going to be 2, 4, 5, which would be a 5-note away perfect fourth. But again, most people probably wouldn't be able to do that because most people are going to say, hey, look, I know my intervals from the major. So they're going to say, what's the distance from the Ionian or major to the 5th, the 1, 5 distance, which would be a 7-note away perfect 5th. So they would start at the G, and then you'd subtract 7 to get back to the 1, right? Which again is a lot easier to do if you use numbers, 11 minus 7, rather than trying to count back 7 from G and counting sharps and flats and whatnot, right? But you could do it. You're going to say, okay, it's going to be 11 minus 2 gets you to 9. If we do the whole steps and half steps, 9 minus 1 gets you to 8, and then 8 minus 2 gets you to 6, and then the 6 minus 2 gets you to 4. So that's going to be it. So again, what I would like to be able to do is say, hey, I know what the modal range is, a 5-1 modal range. It's going to be 2, 4, 5. It's a 5-note away, third modal half step, right? Because if I'm here 1, 2, 3, which would mean it's the 4th scale degree, 5-note away perfect 4th, right? I would also like to know the distance from the 1-5 modal range, or the Ionian to the Mixolydian modal range, right? What is that going to be? It's going to be 2, 4, 5, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the 1-5 modal range is a 7-note away 4th modal half step, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, which would be, from a scale degree standpoint, the 5th 7-note away perfect 5th. All right, let's try one more, or two more. This is the most common one, the Aeolian. So they're like, hey, we're on Aeolian. Hey, we're on Aeolian. So we're like, oh, I know that one. I probably know that one. But I'm going to say, okay, well, there's my A, but now I need to know what the related major is. So if I'm on the 6, it would be easier to go forward. So 6, 7, 8, or 1. It's 2 modal half steps forward. If I know my shape, 1, 2 modal half steps forward. From actual half steps, note-wise, it's 1, 2, 3 steps forward, right? So if I look up here on my shape and I wanted to count it out, it would be easier if I'm on the 6 to go upward. So if I do my formula, I'm going to say in my head, it's whole, whole, half, whole, whole, and that gets me to the 6. So to finish it out from the 6, it's going to be whole gets me to the Locrian, half gets me back to the Ionian. That adds up to 2, 3, a distance of 3 from whatever my point is that I'm starting on. So we can go back on over here and say it would be easier to go forward. So I'm on the 1 plus 2 gets me to the 3. 3 plus 1 is going to get me to the 4, and that's where we are, right? So that's going to be the point, and so that's going to be it to get from the 6 to the 1, right? So what I'd like to be able to say is, okay, the modal range, the 6-1 modal range, the Aeolian Ionian modal range is going to be 2, 3, a 3-note away second modal half step, which would be the 3rd scale degree, a 3-note away minor 3rd, right? But most people know it, would say, okay, what is it from the major? The major, if that was the Ionian, what is the Ionian to the 6 distance? And then I would subtract it out, right? So if I'm going from the major, the Ionian, to the Aeolian, that would be a 9-note away major 6. So I'd have to subtract 9 from 1, which would give me -8 plus 12, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, which would give me 4. Or I can use the formula. So if I'm on the 1, I'm going back 2, gets me 1 back to 12, and then 11, because it goes around in a circle. And then 11 minus 2 gets me to 9. 9 minus 1 gets me to 8. And 8 minus 2 gets me to 6. And 6, finally, minus 2 gets me to the 4, right? So that's going to be that one. All right, let's do one more. No one really plays in Locrian, but we're going to go crazy with it, and we'll do it. We're going to do it here because we're crazy. We're playing Locrian. People just don't understand Locrian. It's like Sharks. I've been watching Sharks on my or the sea. I've been naming fishes on my which is kind of anyway. So, but they're misunderstood, he says. They're misunderstood. They keep on saying more people die from lightning than shark attacks. And it's like, yeah, but you have to measure the people that die from lightning in the water from shark attacks. These statistics they use are misleading, Anyway, so now we're going to say, hey, they say we're on Locrian, which is the Locrian B. So they're on Locrian. We're like, okay, there's Locrian. on the B. So now I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's going to be the related major so I know the shape that I'm in. Well, the Locrian is the 7, so would it make sense to go back to the 1 or forward to the 1? Because it goes around the circle. It makes sense to go forward because it's only one modal half step. So I just go from there to there. There's the relative major. It happens to be 1 half step in this case, as well as 1 modal half step. All right, so then if I go up, if I don't know that, then I can also say, okay, if I'm in the Locrian, I'm right there. It's going to be 1 half step to get to Ionian. So it's going to be a 1 note away minor second. Or I can try to go back the other way and count it up the other way, which is going to be a bit more of a distance, like an 11 note away major 7. So we're going to say, all right, let's go backwards. We're going to say, we're going from the B, and I'm just going to go up 1 to, I'm going to go up the 1 note to get to the C. Boom. And so I would like to know then I'd like to know the modal range. So I would call it a 7-1 modal range, or an Ni modal range, a Locrian to the Ionian modal range, which is a 1 note away modal half step, which would be the second scale degree, which would mean it would be a 1 note away minor second. If I go up the other way, people are going to say, okay, I only know my distances going one way from the major to the 7. So from the Ionian to the 7 would mean that it's going to be an 11 note away major 7. So if I know it's an 11 note away major 7 from this note, I'd have to say 3 minus 11, right, to get to the C. So that would be the long way to do it. But we can also do it by the formula. So 3 minus 2 gets me to 1. 1 minus 2 gets me to 11. 11 minus 2 gets me to 9. 9 minus 1 gets me to 8. And then the 8 minus 2 gets me to 6. And then 6 minus 2 gets me to 4. So the modal range of the of the 1-7 modal range, or the Ionian Locrian modal range, is going to be a 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 11 note away 6th modal half step 7 scale degree, which would be a 11 note away major 7. I know that's a long way to say it, but again, I'm trying to get the idea of the scale the modal range leading into the scale degree, so that again, I want to use distances without forcing myself to change that. So I think that terminology helps to just use those scale degrees as distances, like whole steps and half steps, without having with just ignoring the 3rd, ignoring the 4th, ignoring the 5th, because that's forcing me to change my perspective when I just want to measure distance. Okay, that's the idea.